check out our streaming schedule for this week. We've got tons of content in terms of the NFL and college football, as we're going live just about every single day this week. So make sure you hit that notification bell so you don't miss a single moment where we go live. And now, on with our feature presentation. I want to give you a hypothetical scenario. This Sunday, the Detroit Lions play the Minnesota Vikings in one of the craziest and biggest final games in NFL history, playing in a rematch of the game you're watching right now from earlier in the season. To say if the stakes are high for this one would be putting it lightly. The Lions enter the game at 14-2, and the Vikings enter this game at 14-2. The winner of this game wins the NFC North and gets home field advantage throughout the playoffs, while the loser finishes in second place and gets a wildcard spot. The other thing that the winner of this game gets to do is call themselves champions of the NFC North, which makes sense. You win the division, you can call yourselves the champions of the division. Raise a banner, sell the merch, do whatever you want. You've earned the right to do that as champions of the division. But let's say in this bizarre hypothetical scenario that the Lions and Vikings tie. They play the 60 minutes of regulation, then they play the 10 minutes after that, and the game is still a stalemate. The Lions, having won the head-to-head matchup before, own the tiebreaker and would win the division with a 14-2-1 record over the 14-2-1 Vikings. Makes sense. Well, I want you to imagine that the Vikings find this to be incredibly unfair. How dare the NFL decide that the Lions are the division champions? We, the Minnesota Vikings, are the true champions of the NFC North. We can call ourselves champions. The Lions can't. They didn't have a better record than us. They're not champions of anything. In other words, imagine declaring yourself the champions of the division when you are the wild card. Seems insane, right? And speaking of insane, you'd be insane to not hit that like button down below, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell if you love learning more stories about the weird and the wacky history of the NFL. You do that so you don't miss a second of the action and miss a single video that we post, because we post every single day, and we have a live stream every single day as well. Thanks in advance for your support as we try and hit 70,000 subscribers. Well, I bring all that up because this team right here is the 1973 Pittsburgh Steelers. Coming off of their AFC Central title the previous season in 1972, the Steelers were looking to defend their crown as division champions. And the Steelers were determined to do it, even if the NFL wouldn't recognize it. Seriously, the Pittsburgh Steelers wanted to declare themselves the champions of the AFC Central, even if they did not win the AFC Central, because in the eyes of Chuck Noll and the higher-ups in the organization, they were the true winners of the division. Seems bizarre? Well, we're going to break it down today in one of the craziest instances of illusion that you're ever going to see in your life. Because this is the story behind the bizarre ending to the 1973 season, and a time where, apparently, no one knew who won the division. Before I talk about the actual incident in question, we need some context to understand the scenario for the Steelers entering the final week of the season. The bad news for the Steelers entering the final week was that they had yet to clinch a playoff spot. Only 3 of the 8 playoff spots were decided with 1 week to go, making this field incredibly wide open. The good news, though, was that the Steelers had the inside track on a playoff spot, and it's not hard to see why. They entered the final week of the season with a 9-4 record, and outside of the Miami Dolphins, who somehow looked even better than they did in 1972 when they went undefeated, they looked like the best team in the AFC. The Steelers have the second best offense in the conference, averaging nearly 24 points per game at a time when the scoring average was below 20. They have the second best point differential in the conference at plus 114, and were one of just 4 teams in the conference to allow less than 200 points through their first 13 games. Unfortunately for Pittsburgh, they had kind of fallen off in recent weeks, as despite an 8-1 start, they lost 3 of their last 4 entering the final week, with one of those losses being a Monday night thriller against the Miami Dolphins, which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner. Having said that, following a bounce-back performance against the completely inept Houston Oilers, the Steelers seemed as though they were going to avoid choking away a spot, and look to make the playoffs for the second straight season. All they had to do was win on Saturday against the San Francisco 49ers, and they would be in the playoffs. All they had to do was beat this team right here, a very bad 49ers team. And not only would they be in the playoffs, but they would have a shot at winning the division. And when I say that the 49ers were bad, I mean it. After starting 3-3, the Niners lost 5 of their next 7 games, So they entered at 5-8 with no momentum on their side whatsoever. Should be an easy win for Pittsburgh, right? And to be fair, it was. In a nationally televised game on a Saturday, the Steelers went into Candlestick Park and took care of business, winning at 37-14 in what was the legendary John Brody's final game ever in the NFL. The Steelers sent him into retirement on the wrong note. Oddly enough, I've talked about this game in the past, so if you want to learn more about that, you can do so by clicking the card in the upper right corner. The Steelers scored 30 straight points at one point, and they forced a whopping 6 turnovers. Anytime you can win the turnover margin by 6, you're going to be in a good spot to win the game. Combined, the Niners quarterbacks went 13 for 33, completing just 39% of their passes for 112 net passing yards, while taking 4 sacks and throwing 5 interceptions. Combined, the Niners quarterbacks had a passer rating of 11.8, which is worse than if you did nothing but spike the ball into the ground on every single play. In other words, the Steelers were absolutely dominant, and in case you couldn't tell from the highlights of the game you've been watching, they were in complete control from start to finish. And never, not for 1 second, did this game seem to be in any sort of doubt. This meant that the Steelers would finish the regular season with a 10-4 record, making it just the second time ever that they had double-digit wins in a season, and they would clinch a playoff spot. But while they would clinch a playoff spot, unfortunately for them, they would not be clinching the division. And the reason why was because of the play of this team right here, as in the Cincinnati Bengals. It's actually shocking how this was a division race to begin with, seeing as 8 games into the season, the Steelers had a 3-game lead with 6 to play. However, to the credit of Paul Brown's crew, the Bengals did not lose a single game the rest of the way, as following a 4-4 start, Cincinnati rattled off 6 straight wins. Even more impressive about this comeback was the fact that the Bengals had no games against the Steelers. It would be a bit easier to erase the deficit if you had to play the team in front of you twice, but the Bengals had no control of their destiny whatsoever, and had to win out and hope for a mini collapse by Pittsburgh, and they got it. The Bengals even pulled off one of the most shocking results of the entire season by defeating the Minnesota Vikings 27-0. The fact that the Bengals won was surprising enough, seeing as though the Vikings were one of the best teams in football and were nearly 7-point favorites. But the fact that they won by 4 scores and shut them out, no one saw that coming. Regardless, the Bengals also made it to the playoffs, and just like the Steelers, they were sitting at 10-4. Which raises the question, which team gets the division crown? Which team would have the right as the wild card to travel to Miami to take on the Dolphins? And which team would have the right as the champion to travel to Oakland to take on the Raiders? Would it be Cincinnati, or would it be this team right here, as in the Pittsburgh Steelers, the main focus of this video? Well, the first tiebreaker, as you can probably guess, was head-to-head. This one, however, didn't apply. The Bengals won the first meeting between the teams 19-7, and the Steelers won the second meeting 20-13. With that tiebreaker out of the way, the second tiebreaker back in 1973 was the same tiebreaker that is used today, record within the division. How well did both teams do against the AFC Central? And unfortunately, this one also didn't apply. Both the Steelers and the Bengals swept the lowly Houston Oilers and split their series against the Cleveland Browns. So with both teams boasting identical 4-2 records in the division, we had to go to the third tiebreaker. And that tiebreaker was conference record. It's a little bit different today because common opponents comes before records in the conference. Common opponents was not used at all back in 1973 as a tie-breaking metric. However, this tiebreaker simply looks at how well you played against the teams in your conference. So whichever team had the better record against the AFC would win the division. And the good news was that we were finally able to declare a winner here. No more tiebreakers. The bad news? For the Steelers, this tiebreaker did not work in their favor. Cincinnati's 4 losses were against Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Denver, and Dallas. So all 3 of the 4 losses were within the conference. The loss against the Cowboys, a 38-10 drubbing in Week 8, was to an NFC team. So Cincinnati finished the season with an 8-3 record against the AFC. Pittsburgh's 4 losses, on the other hand, were against Cincinnati, Cleveland, Denver, and Miami, with all 4 losses coming against teams in the AFC. Granted, those were 4 really good teams, each of whom boasted a winning record, but still, 4 AFC losses nonetheless. Cincinnati was 8-3 in the AFC, and Pittsburgh was 7-4, which meant that the Bengals owned the tiebreaker, and the Bengals were the official champions of the AFC North. So that should be the end of our story, right? There's not really a lot here. We see tiebreakers like this all the time, and unless something crazy happens in the tiebreaker, where it goes to an absurd degree, like what happened in 1997 with the Steelers in the AFC Central race against the Jacksonville Jaguars, which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner, this is so common that it is a complete and utter non-story. However, that's where you'd be wrong. Because just because the Bengals won the division didn't mean that the Steelers had to accept that. Because even though the Steelers did not win the division, and by the tiebreaker system in place, they literally did not win the division, that's not up for debate, the Steelers were still going to declare themselves champions of the AFC Central and refuse to recognize Cincinnati as the champions of a division that they literally won. Said head coach Chuck Noll, going into the final game against the 49ers, "We want to be 10-4, because no matter what they do with any so-called championship tiebreaker, there's no way Cincinnati can finish in front of us. It would be hard for anyone to say that Cincinnati had a better record than we did if we're both 10-4. And yes, that is true that it would be hard to say that. But guess what? No one is saying that. All they're saying is that Cincinnati, by winning the tiebreaker that was well established before the season, would be in first place and would win the division, because someone has to be in first. By rule, someone has to be in first place. It would be Cincinnati. But if you thought that was an insane comment, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Because then, Vice President Dan Rooney said, what they're saying is that games against NFC teams aren't as important. And that's crazy. If Cincinnati and Pittsburgh both have 10-4 records, they'll list the 2 teams alphabetically in the record books, and the Bengals will come first. But in our record books, we'll have the Steelers first. That's right. He was declaring that not only did his team win the AFC Central, when they literally did not, but that they were going to put in the record books that they won. This is like when college football teams declare national championships, but amplified to an even stupider degree. Even UCF is saying, take it easy there, Steelers, because that claim is laughable. You can't just declare yourselves to be the champions of the division that you literally did not win. If you come in second place, newsflash, you're not the champions. And I love how Rooney said that the only reason the Bengals would be first in the tiebreaker was because they came first in the alphabet, as though Pittsburgh was named Britsburg or something like that. The Steelers would come first because B comes before C. That's not a thing. That has never been a thing. They'll list the team that got the AFC Central Division champion spot assigned to them. They won't list 2 teams. The Seattle Seahawks, if they beat the Los Angeles Rams on Sunday, aren't going to be in the record books as co-NFC West champions. Not how this works. And why the Steelers thought it worked like that is pure hubris and delusion on their end. And just out of curiosity, when it came to the controversy between these 2 teams behind me right here, I went in the Pittsburgh Steelers media guide for 2024 and checked what they had to say about the 1973 season. And somewhere along the way, they changed their mind and accepted reality. As you can see on the screen, it says right here on page 434 of the media guide that the Steelers earned a wildcard berth that season with a 10-4 record. They got the wild card, but not the division title. You can also see right here on page 460 of the media guide that the Steelers do not have an orange dot next to their name, which they have for every year they won the division. So they recognize that they got the wild card in 1973 and did not win the AFC Central. And on page 498, you can see that it says that the Steelers in 1973 earned a wild card berth and not the AFC Central crown. So somewhere along the way, the Rooneys changed their mind and understood that the Bengals were the true division winners. Take that for what it's worth. Of course, the funny part when talking about the controversy with this team right here and the Steelers is that both the Steelers and the Bengals would have had to go on the road regardless of who won the division and who finished with what record. And both the Steelers and Bengals lost in their respective playoff games. So it didn't really matter at the end of the day. But still, just the idea that a team could claim a division title without actually winning the division is enough to make you scratch your head more than half a century later. Much like you can't just be like Michael Scott and declare bankruptcy, you can't just declare yourselves to be the division champion if you didn't actually, win the freaking division. Because in 1973, the Steelers were called the Steelers because they, quite literally, tried to steal a division title away from its rightful owner. Be sure to like and subscribe if you have not done so already, as it helps the channel out a lot. And check out my other channels, JG8 for the history of college football, JG7 for the history of baseball, and JG9 News, where we talk about all things happening in the NFL. Join me every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern, where we'll play live NFL trivia for cash prizes. And make sure to join me live, as we're on stream just about every single day. And thanks to all our Patreon members and our YouTube members for helping out the channel. See how you become a member and show your support financially in the description down below.